Okay, today's task is a Retina 2 camera. This is a type 014 or 014 camera, the model that preceded the 2A. And this one's here for servicing, of course. Its symptoms: the shutter looks a bit oily, the blades look quite oily. It does run, but they certainly need to be cleaned, those blades. The focus, it's very dry and lumpy feeling. The grease is definitely dried out and it's going to need to be cleaned and stripped and re-lubricated. The film advance. That looks to work quite well. And the rangefinder, let me have a peer out the window. It's not bad as these things go. It's a little bit murky, but fairly good. So, to take the camera apart, well, normally I start by taking the top off, and usually I'll start with the rewind knob. Now the rewind knob, let's place a screwdriver through the fork and just unscrew the knob with my fingers. We'll pop those pieces to one side. The advance knob. Now the advance knob is, you have to use a spanner on the flats at the top of that spool there to stop that from rotating. So we'll just rotate that till I can get my spanner on there. You can sort of get by with a pair of needle nose pliers and various other dodgy methods, but a spanner ground to suit the job is ideal. So that's wedged on there now. I'm just looking at the way that thing moves there. As I move that spanner about, tells me that there's something loose in there. Right, can I get that loose? You have to turn it clockwise against the direction you'd normally turn it, and it won't come loose. So, next trick. A hose clip or a hose clamp is what we use. Wrap a bit of leather or some rubber or anything else with a bit of guts to it around that knob to stop the chrome from being damaged. Put my clip on there, tighten the thing up. Hold my spanner and again turning clockwise. Right, that's it. That gave me much more leverage so I could break that thread free. Easy when you know how. So there's our take up knob or our film advance knob. Looking to see what we've got. Now I need to take the top off that shutter release, and I don't immediately see the tool I wanted, so I'll just make do with something else. I'll wrap a bit of leather around that knob, that button, use my pliers, give it a twist. Did it come loose? No, it didn't. Let's try again. That button is quite easily damaged. And I don't think it's going to come loose without the proper tool. Back in a second. Okay, options for getting that button off. I've got a pair of pliers here that I ground the tips down on, bored out the centre, and that's great. This is designed really to do the rewind button on the 2C, 3C and later models, but it works fine for this. So, the alternative, a pair of crimp pliers like this. you can use these crimp ends here, these rounded crimp ends, they'll do the job well too. Again, it's ideal to have a bit of leather in there if you're going to do that. And just to pad those jaws a bit, make sure that that's a quick twist. Yes, and there's the button free without any scarring, which is important. Don't lose those buttons, they're of course very hard to come by, they're often lost. Clear all that mess out the way and carry on with the disassembly. So for the top cover, let's just pop the front out so the camera balances itself a bit better. One screw at each end of the top cover. The film reminder dial, that just lifts off with the top cover, nothing to worry about there. Now to lift the top cover off, cock the shutter, roll the sprocket forward with your thumb, hold it there, to press the shutter release down as far as it will go, and you should be able to lift the top cover back off there, back off the release, the rewind lever at the back, and there's the top cover off. Easy, when you know how. So under the top cover, what we see, rangefinder obviously, 2 screws to remove that. Our frame counter. Frame counter is 3 pieces, a small spring, and this is 2 pieces. Now the longer section here with the slots on, that goes towards the dial. The shorter section, that's where the spring goes, and it pops on the top there. So let's get the rangefinder off. 2 screws. Shake those screws out. There's our rangefinder. The rangefinder here is basically the same as you would find on a Retina 2A camera. Nothing tricky there. We'll clean and deal with that later. Now here, normally I strip the rewind off because if I'm going to be cleaning the parts in the cleaner, I might just as well do those as well. Or if I'm cleaning the parts manually, again, I might just as well have that apart since we're cleaning and lubricating everything else. There's not much to go wrong with the rewind. It's the outer collar. Now the inner of course is 2 pieces. Now I can feel that that's a little bit sticky with dried grease, so it's probably just as well we're having this apart. It's held together with a single screw, which is a special shape. You'll notice that when you take it out, it doesn't look like anything else. Don't mix it up. That can just pull out, and that just needs to be cleaned and get that old grease off there. You can see the discoloration, that's old grease in the main, and that's just a bit sticky. We don't want it to be sticky. Back to the top of the camera. What have we got here? Excuse me while I get a pair of tweezers. Right, so we can unhook this. This is for setting the frame counter, so I'll unhook that spring. That arm should just about lift off now. Here's our wheel off the top. We can take the spring off. Right, a single screw here on that post. That's quite tight, that's unusual. Hope it didn't break off. No, that's good. That held the lever in for that. This piece, that black shield, that just comes off, lifts straight off. Have film advance and shutter release components here. We'll undo this screw. Now that screw is left hand threaded. We've got to stop the shaft from turning as we did with to get the advance knob off. So I'll just get my spanner on there again, if I can. There it is. I've got these pliers. They used to be circlip pliers that have been suitably mutilated. They do nicely. So we've got to turn this clockwise to loosen it. In other words, righty-loosey. Oh, it'll go. Well, someone had very enthusiastically tightened that thing up, which is not required. Take that collar off. Here's our advanced rewind lever that can come off. The shutter release should just about lift off. May have to pull back this arm. The shutter release shaft button will come off. This gear, single screw and set. This is extremely tight in this camera. That's a bit unusual. I have more trouble with loose screws than I do with screws that are too tight. That can come off for cleaning. That gear probably just sits on that shaft unless it's pressed on. We'll find out. Let's lift that off. No, it's just sitting there. So that gear pretty much sits there. It's not a tight fit at all. This component here, we've got 3 levers that sit on that post. And there are spacer washers between them. So I'll take this off piece by piece. There's our screw post. I'll stop using that screwdriver, that wants to stick. It's a tight fit. Okay. This piece first, this piece second, then a washer, quite a large hole in the centre of that, then this lever, then another washer, this one with a small hole in the centre. So remember the order that those go back together. We have 2 springs and 2 screws. The mechanism here is basically the same as on a Retina 1 type 010 or indeed a Retina 2 type 011. Those springs are different shapes from each other. Watch them as you take them off. They look similar, they are not the same, and if you mix them up, things will not work correctly. So there should be 3 screws here holding this on. I thought that was going to be loose because we had quite a bit of noticeable slop in that film advance knob, but it's not loose at all. So I'm just looking at this part to see if the wear is in there, and there is some wear. That'll probably, I don't think that's significant. I think once that's cleaned and lubricated with suitable fresh grease, that will not be an issue at all. And that basically is the top of the camera stripped as far as we need to go. The base of the camera. Well, here we need to peel back the leather. We need to get back at least this far because at this point we've got a screw holding the bellows in. So I've got to get my scalpel under that leather. Now the action is as much one of lifting and levering the leather off as it is of anything else. You don't really need to cut. The sharp edge of the blade simply allows you to slide it under the leather. You're not really cutting through anything to any great extent. And be reasonably cautious about how much you pull the leather up. Keep it as flat as you possibly can, because if you stretch it, leather is very good at stretching. Once you stretch it, it won't go back into shape. So you want to keep it as flat as possible. Often the leather just about falls off cameras because of corrosion underneath. In this case, the camera doesn't really show any corrosion, and the adhesive's done a marvellous job, and the leather's coming off cleanly. You can see here I've really just got bare leather showing there, so that tells me I've peeled the leather off the glue. The glue has stayed stuck to the base. When I go to stick this back down, any little dags of glue or leather fibres that are floating loose, I'll remove those before I glue things back down. Tripod socket. Tripod sockets are commonly loose on any of the retinas. It's not that they're particularly poorly attached, and screws will work loose anyway as a matter over time, just through thermal cycling. Right, so there's their tripod socket. It's easy, just straight through. Just up, nothing clever. Underneath it we have a spring. You can see that's like just like a coil of a spring cut off. And on top of that sits a plain disc. Now that is simply where your tripod screw should come up to and no further. It's a bit of an elaborate way of doing that, but just to encourage you not to over tighten things. One of the things that ruins tripod sockets on cameras is people taking a long tripod screw and screwing the living shit out of it into a short hole, which will tend to tear the socket off the bottom of the camera in some cases, or distort it, stretch it so that the screws are no longer holding it firmly down and it rattles a bit. And of course, when it's not firm on the tripod, people will screw the nut up even tighter, trying to make the camera stop wobbling, and so they'll just carry on until the camera's completely ruined. It's quite a normal problem. Right, well, I'll prepare to remove the front next. So the front door, we have two screws which form the hinge pins, one on the base of the camera. These are quite small, easily lost. One on the top of the camera. I pull the door forward. Now there's a washer there, a spacer washer. Some cameras will have one washer, some will have two. They may be at the top or at the bottom. I'm just checking to see if there's one at the bottom. I can't see anything. I'm checking to see if one stayed stuck in the body, and I can't see anything. So in that case we had one washer and it was at the top. So our door's floating, we've got to lift it off the slots. Now I do that by applying some pressure from the base here, pushing upwards against the camera body, and I should be able to stretch the arms far enough that I can lift those pins off that slot at the top and then pull the arm back. That's the door. Ooh. So the next task is to remove the shutter. Now here I've got one of these extinct Belgian tools. It's just ideal for this job. It's better than the other one that I'd made myself. The tool goes around the outside of the rear lens group and should engage with two notches in the retaining ring, and you need to keep a fair bit of pressure on the tool to stop it from wanting to lift out of that retaining ring. Otherwise you will end up with a retaining ring which is quite scarred. You can see here where a tool has spun out at that point and just scarred that brass. Sometimes it'll distort it and make them hard to put back. That will be easily disguised when we put the camera back together. So take note of any spaces you've got here. These shims are quite important. They'll be paper in some cases, metal in others. Be especially careful with the paper ones, because if you tear them it's a bit hard to get them to stay back where they're put. They were intended to match the lens and shutter assembly to the bodies, and the bodies would have already been pre-assembled. They would very likely have had the rangefinder and everything set correctly, so that when this was at infinity position on the focus scale, the rangefinder would in turn focus an infinity target. Shutter and lens assemblies always have some slight difference in tolerance. Now, by the adding or removing of shims here, you could match a shutter and lens assembly to a standard body, and that was what people were trying to achieve, and generally that's the case. So don't lose the shims if they're present, you need them. I'll pop that to one side. We're down to the body here now, and at this stage the next thing to do is remove the focus assembly here, and I will start by removing this piece. This ring here couples to this point, and that is what moves your rangefinder in it, the arm on the rangefinder in and out. So we'll just undo that single screw, lift that arm out. Now we can see our focus scale ring, it's the chrome part. We've got the inner and outer helicals here. And fortunately for our demonstration today, you can see the bright outer and the dark inner. Now these need to be, our first alignment task basically is to make note of the position of the focus scale ring on the outer helical, and I'm checking it to see if there are marks there to help us line it up. I don't immediately see one. So what I would normally do at this point is make myself, there are marks on there, but they're only for the inner and outer helical. Now I would normally do this. So I would swing this round to the infinity position so it's hard against the stock. Normally I take a rule and my scalpel, and I'll place that on there. I'll turn this round so you can see what I'm doing, and I'll just make two lines from the focus scale ring to the outer helical, and I will make one on the opposite side in the same way. Now I can clearly see where the outer helical and the focus scale ring should be aligned to each other. So we've got 4 screws hold this on. Here's our focus scale ring. Now I'm having a close look at this because we know the focus was rough. I'm looking for any sign that that had been shifting on the outer helical. Now the screw heads would have left a trace in here where they were screwed down, and I can see those, and they look to be well formed. There's no sign there that that's been shifting. That's good. Means I won't have to chase it. So here we've got 4 screws, in this case they're black, and they will hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. And I just heard the bellows fall back into the body there, so I know that that's happened. We have 6 screws. They're bright screws, nickel plated. They're fairly tight. They hold this black retainer plate to the focus mount, and the black retainer plate in turn, let's lift that off with its screws, that holds the inner and outer helical in place. So there's that inner and outer helical. So now what I need to do is take great note of where these two are aligned to each other, and normally I would align them so that their front surface were flat. When they appear fairly flat to me, that serves as a good reference point. That's about there. Right. So we already have 2 bright scratches here and 1 bright scratch there where we aligned the inner and outer helical, the outer helical with the focus scale. Normally I would just continue those on. At this point, this is not the infinity position, this is simply the point where the inner and outer are level. And I'm just going to scribe those lines through, continue them onto here. Now what we're doing here is just making sure that we have the inner and outer started in the right thread position. There's a limited number of thread positions, of course. They're reasonably well spaced apart, so as long as that appears right when we put it back together, it will be right. Those pieces can come apart, they are very sticky, the grease is dried out, quite nasty. Back to the body. The focus mount here is held into the body with 4 screws, or it's held to the back of the front standard with 4 screws. Bright, nickel, quite large diameter heads, 1 in each corner. Often those screws are loose. If those screws are loose, it means that the shutter and focus is loose on the body, and you'll probably notice that there's a bit of a wobble in the shutter. So here's our focus mount with its 4 screws that held the bellows in place. Knock those out, put them to one side before I lose them. You can see that dried grease, that probably hasn't been touched since the 1950s, about 1950 when this camera would have been new. Now what I want to do is take out the Bellows Struts mechanism, which is sometimes awkward. Okay, so the Bellows Struts mechanism here are held in by 4 screws. One at the top. Now this one is typically fairly easy. That's this one here in this case. And on the base of the camera there's one under the leather here. Now you've got to be careful here not to damage that post. If you bend that, the shutter will not work correctly once you reassemble it, so be careful. I've got this on a block of wood raised up to stop any damage. Here's our screw in the base plate. I'm just exposing it, scratch back that leather, and we'll see it won't come loose. So, desperate measures. Here I've got an old screwdriver. It had lost its top a long time ago. It works fine as an impact driver. Not much is required. Just make sure it's seated in the screw. A couple of sharp taps as I keep some pressure on. The screw's loose. You don't need to beat the camera to death. You don't want to distort that body. So we have the screws loose top and bottom. Let's close those struts up. We have 2 more screws. They are in the film chamber at the end of the camera here, where your film cassette would sit. We'll see if they're loose. It would be a vain hope. No. No. Alright, well I'm going to use the same technique as I used before, the impact driver, but that'll be off camera because I normally held the camera between my knees while I thumped this. One. Two. And you just need to break the screws free. Once they're free, they'll just run out. There are 2 screws. Pull the bellows struts forward and then lift that arm off there. There is a single spring here, coil spring, which returns the shutter release. Take care not to lose that, and there should be 2 washers, 2 spacer washers that look like that. That's at top and bottom of the struts, between this point and that point and the body shell, and there they are. So I'm pleased to see those. Our film sprocket can lift out. This is Bakelite. I can feel dried out grease on the bottom here. That just needs to be clean and go back. Bakelite's pretty robust as long as you don't break it. You'll be away laughing. That should clean easily. There's the spring that provides a little bit of spring tension on it. Again, that's just dried grease that needs to be dealt with. You have very little trouble with this sprocket shaft here. That's running quite smoothly, it looks okay. I can remember one occasion where that screw fixing the sprocket to the shaft was loose. And so as the film revolved through the camera, it rotated the sprocket, but it didn't rotate the shaft, and so therefore didn't rotate the gear here reliably, and so that it didn't meter when a frame of film had passed through, and so you could wind from one end of the film to the other on occasion without the winder stopping. So that's pretty much it for that. That's how you strip down that camera. I'll show you the lens and shutter assembly separately. But that's all that's required. So this all needs to be cleaned and then reassembled.